I don't eat carbs.
Thank you for coming. Good to see you.
There's 3 chairs here. 2 here.
Pizza's here. The pizza bill was $400.
Hi. Hello.
Mr. Blaska, Dave, would you be willing to share your opinion about the idea of raising taxes on camera? Thank you. What are your thoughts on the idea of raising taxes here in Madison?
Well, I think we're hitting the ceiling right now. It comes to the point where you have to make hard decisions and do some cuts. If they can't cut the Police Civilian Oversight Board, I don't know what's wrong with the council. We've got to make some tough decisions.
And what do you think about the fact that we're spending $400 on pizza for this event?
Is that right? Oh, I want some.
There's back there. Here's the weird thing. They got Kirkland cookies. They spent $40 on Kirkland cookies, but then they got pizza from Glass Nickel. I think anybody who's been to Costco knows pizza at Costco is a lot cheaper.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
Yeah, go take some photos of it. It's quite funny. If you need a chair.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
They had a meeting a few months ago. They had an almost identical room that didn't fit enough people. Now they're expecting more people to give everybody the exact same room.
I can see
we counted it up. We were here an hour early. We counted 90 chairs for a meeting that's supposed to have 150 people.
And so I'm going to
Let's see how crowded it gets.
to know this. Maybe sit here might be a good idea. Great. Nice to meet you. Two chairs here. You do not have to sign in and pass the clipboard around. Two chairs here. But it doesn't require.
It was either this, it was going to be this or the janitor's closet. And, I guess this is better than the janitor's closet. Oh, guys, there's pizza. They spent $400 on pizza from Glass Nickel. They spent $40 on cookies from Kirkland and didn't get the pizza at Costco, which maybe would have made more sense economically. But
I
in
like last name. I do. I like it.
it's
I
not
like
bad.
it a lot. I'm not having it. Done that.
Oh, you don't think we should have spent $400 on pizza at a meeting about being $27 million in debt?
I'm just looking around trying to see where the heck we can sit. And I don't see anything. Chair.
Did you saw that? Yeah. My princess. My princess. Joy, I'm
Hey there, Miles. How's it going? Yeah, I'm awake. You don't think I remember who you are?
No, heck, I remember bartending at events at, what was her place called? Wind Down.
Yeah. Oh my lord. That's been a long time.
Wait, the center, is it like on the Capitol Square?
Yep. So you know where the Veterans Museum is at?
Yeah,
We're in the same building.
Same, yeah.
Enter a different door.
Yeah, I mean, that's, God, I remember when like 100 State had, that was where they had their second location.
Yep.
And now they're a couple blocks away.
Rick's co-working is below us in their old luggage place. I think they have the 6th and the 8th floor, but they definitely have one of the old stations. It is terrible.
I know, this room, they had the room was the exact same size as last time here, and they didn't have enough people.
This was, I didn't realize this was the same space.
Well, like, I don't know if it's the exact same room, but it's the exact same size as the one they had for the Sock Creek meeting. And it wasn't enough to accommodate, and now, I mean, look, they're, bringing in chairs. Yeah. Have you had a chance to see much of the stuff about Dairy Drive?
Yes, and I wanted to have a conversation with you. So I'm like, what? What is happening?
People are dying there.
I mean, it's like, I'm always interested in like, okay, what's happening?
How do we misspend that much money? And
Shoot me an email so we can have a conversation. Sure. I don't want to interrupt. I see they're about to start.
Yeah. But no, I mean, it's like, especially when COVID was going on, for that amount of money, you could have bought a hotel.
I get you. But what do we do now that we didn't buy a hotel in COVID?
Well, number one, don't let them shoot heroin there.
Yeah,
I mean, that's, especially when it's
or if you
resulted.
like them to shoot heroin in.
They allow them to shoot heroin.
Can I have your attention? We're going to be getting started in just a little bit, so if we can start getting a little bit quiet in here, please.
There's at least 3 seats up here in front.
So for exits, we have one right over here on the right-hand side, on my right-hand side, and then also outside is where the exits are. I want to thank all of you all for being here tonight. The purpose of this meeting is to just get a better understanding of where the budget is for the city, understand the deficit that we are in and what the city has been doing and is planning on doing to potentially get that $27 million deficit settled. If you would like to have language interpretation, please visit the tables where, oh, no, okay, just at the back, okay. So at the back and there. In order to respect everyone's time, we're going to try to keep the schedule, which we're already a little late, which is in the handout, and we encourage everyone to use plenty of courtesy, be honest, and open-minded. We're here to be able to listen to you all, but we also need to be respectful of our city staff and the people that are here. I know as the alder for District 1, there are people here from my district that I do want to be able to understand what they value for the city, and I just ask that we be respectful, that we treat each other with respect, and that we allow individuals to do the presentation and the group organization plans that we already have in place. What I'm going to do right now is if the host alders can please come up here. That would be District 1, District 7, District 9, District 19, and District 20, just to introduce yourselves, and then we will get started.
I'm Johnny Revere, District 19 Older. Thank you so much for coming.
Good evening, my name is Alder Nasra Uhelia, District 7. Thank you so much for taking the time. I hope this will be beneficial to you tonight and we can answer all the questions that you have. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nikki Conklin, and I'm the Alder of the 9th District. I appreciate seeing so many faces here, and I look forward to hearing all your diverse comments. Thank you.
And again, my name is John Duncan. I'm the Alder for District 1 and also the new Vice President for the Common Council. At this point in time, what we're going to do is go ahead and start having the presentation by our Director of Finance, Dave Schmidt. Sorry, just real quick. I was also told if you would like to sign up, there is sign-up sheets. What we will be utilizing these for is to be able to provide any questions that we are not able to get to. We will be able to provide the answers to the people that sign up with their email addresses so that that is able to be gotten back to you. We also will be having that information on the city's website once we are able to get all of those questions answered from all 5 of the budget sessions that we are having.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here this evening, spending some time about the budget. My name is David Schmidtke. I'm the Finance Director for the city, and I will run through a few slides to give you a little bit of background on the outlook for the city's 2025 budget, and try to put that into some context. And I think you're putting questions on cards, and after I finish my presentation, we'll run through those questions. All right, so we'll cover the city budget, the current situation, how the city uses the tax dollars that you pay, what has been done so far around what we call the structural deficit, what are some of those options, what are some of the limits on the city, and we'll walk through if those limits are really some of the strictest in the country in terms of what cities have in terms of revenues available to them. What's next in the process, and then we'll run through some examples in some of the larger agencies of some of the services that they provide and the cost of those services. So I think we hope to do that. So with the city budget, you might hear that there's a capital budget and an operating budget. Both are planning documents, so they're plans for the upcoming year. In the case of the operating budget, for the capital budget, it's the plan for the next year and then the next 5 years in terms of capital spending. So the capital budget is really about investments in long-term infrastructure and assets. So a building, like a library, for example, or a fire station, fire truck, and so on. Those are in the capital budget. They're primarily paid for with long-term debt. That debt is primarily paid for from property taxes each year or federal grants or state grants. The operating budget, in contrast, is to pay for everyday services. So police services, emergency medical services, libraries, the folks who do the work in the parks, and so on. That's the operating budget. That's the annual cost each year of paying staff, the support costs for staff, monies that are provided to nonprofit organizations who provide services on behalf of the city, and so on. The operating budget is primarily funded by property taxes. About almost 3/4 of that budget comes from the property tax. Other sources are charges for services that might be received, user fees. There is some state and federal aid in that. When we talk about the capital and the operating budget, we can't sort of transfer money or take money from the capital budget and spend it in the operating budget. Capital budget is, like I said, one-time investments, for buildings and so on, funded with debt. Operating budget is ongoing expenditures every year for operations. So we'll be focusing on the operating budget when we talk about the outlook. Some of the facts about the operating budget, it's a little over $400 million in 2024. About 63% of that budget is for personnel. So basically the people who pick up the trash, plow the streets, are at the library, helping patrons and so on. And so the salaries, the benefits associated with personnel. As I said, the largest sort of share of funding, revenue source for that budget is the property tax. State aid is about a little over 10%, and then those local revenues, those charges for services and so on, are about 16% of the budget. So we have a structural deficit, which means that when we look at the cost to continue services every year, the same sort of basket of services that everyone receives, the amount of revenue that the city can raise is not enough to pay for those expenses every year. That projected deficit right now for 2027 is $27 million, and that deficit gets larger each year after that. There's a few reasons for that. One is we have strict limits on revenues from the state in terms of both the kinds of revenues that we can have. We're very reliant on the property tax because of that's what we're allowed to do under state law. Many cities around the country have other major revenue sources like a local sales tax or a local income tax, for example. In Wisconsin, the approach that the state has set up is local governments levy a property tax, the state shares income and sales tax that they collect with local governments. But Madison receives the lowest amount of that shared revenue in the state. So that's the revenue side. Costs are going up. We have cost of living adjustments, cost of health insurance, and so on. And we have a growing city. So we have the fastest growing city in the state. And our revenues, as allowed under state law, don't really reflect that growth. And then finally, the economic effects of the pandemic reduced revenues to the city for a few years in the early stages of the pandemic. You saw, for example, the state budget had a huge surplus because of increases in sales tax and income tax collections. County saw increases in their sales tax collections. The city doesn't have those revenue streams. And so we didn't see that bounce back. We were fortunate to get federal money as states and cities around the country received. We used that to keep services going for a few years, but that money ends at the end of this year. So when we talk about the 27 million, this just kind of breaks it down into pieces. We will see some revenue growth under the state law limits on property taxes. A total of about $13 million of revenue growth. But then we have one-time monies that were used to balance the 24 budget, the budget we're in right now. That includes some tax increment districts, funding from closed districts. If there's a surplus, that gets shared with the school district, the county, the city, and the technical college. We have the last sort of remaining piece of the federal aid, what we call ARPA, or American Rescue Plan Act, and then we did use some reserves to help balance the budget, a little over $9 million. Then when we turn to spending, we have to pay city staff, so there's increases in wages, benefits, and so on. Debt is increasing to pay for the capital budget, and then increases in other parts of the budget. You put that together, that's a $40 million sort of cost that we have to address. We only have 13 million of revenue growth. That difference is the 27 million. So we get questions a lot about property taxes, obviously, when we have over 70% of the budget coming from the property tax. And the taxes are levied on property that is taxable. There is property in the city that's not taxed. So certain nonprofit entities, government buildings, and so on are not taxed. And Madison probably has about 30% of its total property area, let's say, that's not taxable under various laws and so on. We look at this from an average value home perspective, which in 2024 is about $424,000 in the city. The taxes on that home in 2024 are about $8,600. That's before there are some state tax credits applied that reduce that, but that's the total amount. Now that gets split between the various local governments within the city limits, the school district, the county, the city, and the technical college. So the city's share of that tax bill is about 35%, or about $3,000 of that $8,600. When we look at where does the money go, most of it, or a large share of it, goes to public safety and public health. Debt service is the next largest share of the budget. So of that $3,010, about $1,280 goes for police, fire, and public health. About $474 goes for debt service. Public works, which is going to be refuse collection, recycling, parks, and those related sorts of activities, about $372. The sort of administration of all that, the support services, information technology, and so on, that costs about $228. All of the planning, zoning, building inspection, community and economic development activities, about $211. Transportation, which includes traffic engineering and so on, a little under $200. The library, about $150. And then the rest of the budget's about $100 of that $3,000. There's often questions about, well, my assessment went up quite a bit, and will my taxes go up the same amount? And so just how the taxes are calculated, first of all, your property is assessed by the city assessor, basically based on what's happening with sales of property. And housing prices have been going up, not only in Madison, but in other parts of the country. So what we saw in terms of that average value home between 2023 and 2024, that average value home went up about 12.6%. Now, some went up less than that, some went up a lot more than that, but the average is 12.6%. The taxing jurisdictions, so the city, the school district, the county, and the technical college, they set a property tax levy. Most of that is controlled under state law, that it can only go up by a certain amount. That total levy is about $810 million. The total property tax base is about $42 billion. So that levy went up 6.5%. Tax on the average value home went up about 12.6%. The taxes on the average value home went up about 4%. So that tax rate, that when you take the tax divided by the value, that gets a rate, and that's what's multiplied by the value of your house or whatever property you might own to calculate the taxes. So that's probably best illustrated by this for since 2019. So turning to, we have this deficit, we've had a structural deficit since 2011 when the state legislature put into effect very strict limits on property taxes, made some significant reductions in state aid to cities, and balanced the state budget that way. So there have been steps taken. That deficit's gotten much larger because of the pandemic and the effects on revenues and the limits of how much revenues the city has. So we have increased employee contributions from police officers and firefighters to their pensions. We've restructured health insurance contributions from employees to increase those. There have been spending cuts made. In the most recent budget, the budget we're in right now, was $6 million in reductions. The room tax rate was increased in 2018 from 9% to 10%. Now there's another area where the state controls how that money is used. Only 30% of that can be used for things like police services or firefighting services, emergency medical services, and so on. The remaining 70% has to be used for tourism-related activities. Ambulance fees have been increased several times since 2011. Vehicle registration fee, which is one of the few general revenues allowed under state law, that was first established in 2020. There have been special charges created. These are citywide charges that show up on the Madison municipal bill, where you see your water fee, your stormwater, and so on. Those have been created to pay for urban forestry activities as well as recycling activities. And then the one-time money from the American Rescue Plan Act of the federal government, a really unprecedented amount of assistance to states and cities to really address the economic, social, and health effects of the pandemic. The city was fortunate to receive that. And then to use a portion of the city's rainy day fund, which is one-time money, to help maintain current service levels. So all of those have been put into place since 2011 at different times. What options do we have going forward? We have to have a balanced budget. So you might hear at the federal government level, they have a deficit. Each year they have a deficit budget. At the state and local level, our budget has to be balanced each year. That means what we spend has to equal the amount of revenue we're taking in. So we have basically the option of reducing expenditures. So that could be done by reducing budgets in every agency, cutting specific programs and services, laying off staff, for example. Just to give you one example, of $27 million is roughly the equivalent of 270 positions in the city. The city has about 3,100 staff. That's all funds, not just the general fund, but that's the water utility and so on. Or it can increase revenues. The options on the revenue side are very limited. New special charges could be looked at. could increase fines and fees, but as I mentioned, fines and fees are only about 15%, 16% of the budget right now. So closing this gap would mean large increases in fees, and those fees cannot exceed the cost of the service for which they're charged. Finally, under state law, the option to increase the property tax is through voter referendum. That's the option, the only option allowed under state law. So, other options, with a structural deficit means each year our revenues are not enough to cover our ongoing costs. So we need permanent changes to revenues and expenditures in the general fund. The options that I'm going to mention here do not solve the deficit, but they could be considered as part of broader plans. So one is like one-time cuts or one-time revenues. Sometimes we hear about, well, why don't you furlough staff? That cost will come back in the future once the furlough ends, unless that staff of service is permanently ended. It also can result in more overtime costs, so we don't really get too far. We can sell city land, but again, that's one-time money. That does not address each year's gap. And then we can use the rainy day fund that has been used sparingly over the last budgets at different times. But again, that's one time, it's not a sustainable approach. There's also a lot of talk about let's cut the capital budget, let's reduce debt service. Reducing debt service does reduce, all the things being equal, the amount of property tax, but you cannot take that reduction under state law and move it to pay for operating costs, which is where we have the problem. That's not allowed under state law and the way the state property tax limits work. There are other funding sources that the city has, but those are strictly regulated. So the water fee, for example, that has to be used for water services. So we can't take money from that part of the budget and use it to pay for police, fire, or other types of services in the general fund. Been a lot of talk in the last few days about the surplus. The city ended the 2023 fiscal year with a surplus. It was really the result of a rapid increase in interest rates. And so the city's investments, and we invest our cash balances every day, came in higher than what was budgeted. We also have had a lot of vacancies, a lot of turnover in positions because of the strong labor market. People can find other jobs that they might find more attractive. And so that turnover in staff was also at a higher pace than we anticipated. This meant the rainy day fund has been lifted to about 21% of the budget. Our minimum target is 15%. I will mention that the rainy day fund is a key part of the state's AAA bond rating. In return for our AAA bond rating, which reflects the strength of our economy in Madison, our financial management, the size of our rainy day fund and reserves, and our prudent use of debt. Because we have that AAA fund rating, which we've had for 50 years, we get the lowest possible interest cost on our debt. So the debt we issue to pay for capital projects around the city, we get the lowest cost for that because of that AAA rating. In terms of the budget outlook, the vacancy rate is slowing in 2024. And that's kind of matching what's happening with the general economy. The 2024 budget, I mentioned those cuts earlier. We've already made adjustments in the 2024 budget for what's happening with staff turnover. The interest rate impacts are short term. The Federal Reserve is expected to cut interest rates either later this year into 2025. So what we saw in 2023 is not going to continue into the future. And so that structural deficit happens every year. And this graph just gives you tries to show a little picture of if we use that surplus all in the balance of the $27 million deficit, it's gone the next year and the deficit comes back. So this is an issue that needs to be addressed permanently with permanent measures. So turning to what happens next, what we've been doing with the start of this year has developed an information series on the budget. You can find it at City Budget's webpage, the 2025 Budget Outlook. We had a series of briefings for the Common Council, longer versions of what you've seen here. The council adopted a resolution in April that set out a series of guidelines for how to proceed with developing the budget for 2025. So that includes looking at it on a long-term basis, considering various revenue options and expenditure reduction options, avoiding staff layoffs, and other sort of principles to sort of generally guide the development of the budget. We're now in the midst of the community engagement sessions, and then starting next month, agencies will begin to develop their budget proposals for 2025. Over the summer, there'll be continuing public engagement. There is the possibility, obviously, of the council considering a resolution for a referendum on the November ballot. There's a process under state law that needs to be followed associated with that. The question that goes on the ballot is strictly prescribed under state law, and the council has to adopt, if they want to proceed with that approach, has to adopt that change no later than its scheduled meeting on August 6th. And then the mayor develops the executive capital and operating budgets over the summer. Then we move into the legislative phase in the fall, where the council and the council's finance committee is reviewing the mayor's proposed budgets, amending those budgets, and then ultimately adopting a budget and adopting a property tax levy in November. All right, almost a half hour. I will run through a few of these slides. You can find the rest of these slides. I think some of them are on the sheets on your table. You can also see them, as I said, at the city budget website. I think there's a QR code for that. But I'll just run through a few agencies just to give you an example of some examples of some of the services delivered and what their cost is. So first, looking at public safety, public health, the largest share of the city budget. It includes police, fire, and public health. So the police budget is about $91 million annually. Nearly 90% of that budget is personnel. The other parts of the budget are really sort of non-personnel activities, so costs of equipment, uniforms, and so on. There's charges from fleet, for example, for fuel use, and then there's some revenues that the police department brings in to offset that. So a few examples, police does some community outreach, called community outreach and resource education. The cost of that's about $2.25 million per year. Their traffic enforcement is about $638,000. Now, traffic enforcement would continue even if this sort of element was eliminated, but that's the cost of the additional activity that they do in terms of traffic safety enforcement. So those are a couple examples in the police department. In the fire budget, that's about a $71 million budget. Again, most of it is personnel. So it's the firefighters, the paramedics, and so on, who respond to emergencies and help those in need. So a couple of examples there. The cost of a fire engine or fire ladder company is about $3.1 million. We have 14 stations around the city. Fire medic unit, so that's the emergency response. An ambulance comes, maybe takes you to the hospital. The cost of each of those units is $1.6 million. And they cover specific geographic areas and are set up in such a way to have rapid response with target, I think, goals within about 5 to 7 minutes of response time. Library, another part of the budget, I think everyone's familiar with, about $21 million. Again, a lot of that is personnel, but the library also has a lot of supplies, equipment, contracts, in terms of library books, digital materials, and so on. And the cost of a branch, obviously there's different size branches that ranges from about $800,000 to $1.3 million per year. There's 9 libraries around the city. Just go through Public Works and then I'll wrap up. So Public Works, about $50 million. That includes the streets budget, which is one of the largest share of that Public Works budget. About half of the budget is personnel. A lot of it is involved in supplies, for example, buying sand to spread during ice events. The upkeep on the vehicles. We contract with third parties to do some of the snow removal activity.
Sometimes.
And then there's also the fuel costs and so on. So one activity that the streets division does is they go around, they fill potholes around the city and do minor street repairs. If that were eliminated, obviously that has an impact on deterioration of our streets. The cost of that activity is about $1.2 million annually of garbage each year. Brush collection, about $1.4 million, about 5 rounds that happen in the spring through the fall, and then 2 rounds to pick up holiday trees. And then large item pickup, about the same amount, $1.3 million. Again, that's done through a work order system where residents schedule a time to have it picked up. And then the drop-off sites where you can bring brush and other material, those cost about $800,000 a year to operate. So I'm going to stop there. Those are sort of some of the big pieces of the budget and some examples of services. And turn it back.
So right now what we're going to do is we're going to go and have food. Yep, so right now we've got the note cards question and answer session. So if you've got questions to put on the note cards and bring them up during the break that we're having food so that they're able to go through them, and then we'll be able to have about 45 minutes of answering those questions that are on the note cards. No, ma'am. Yep. So if this side of the room can go ahead and go back and get your food if you're interested in getting.
It was only $400.
Yes, sir.
What's the harm of the group not asking questions? You would think.
That's what we have for the note card question and answer section.
But you're an alder. You have a chance to make whatever changes, and there's other alders here that could do the same thing. People came here for questions, not for food.
Thanks, Nino.
Thanks.
They will get to a lot. They will get to a lot. I went to a lot of your stuff. The reason that we're doing the note cards is last meeting we had 133 total questions, and that's just not possible. I understand. So,
So what's going to happen is that you will get an opportunity
All my
to
years.
have your
City's
questions
never provided.
answered.
You're providing.
Okay, so if you can filter through, the important thing is to fill out your card
Take the card.
and
How do
get
we
that
know
card back to the front of
It's
the
not very
room.
transparent.
If the alders in the house could pick up the card, that would help facilitate and move through the room. So if you can fill out the card, just hold your card up, and an alder will pick it up, or those who are helping in the room will pick that up.
Can you add that, add their contact information?
And also add your contact information, so what will happen is that there are a lot of people in the room, look around you. We will not get to all of those questions.
I was kind of surprised when it's like, wait, you
Make
spent
sure that you
$500,000
turn your questions in, and we'll go to those questions. We'll have the opportunity to give this feedback to you.
You'd be a good one, Hannah.
One way, make sure you include your district so that they're all there to get back to.
Answer the question. Do you mind letting me finish? Do you mind letting me? And what we're doing, because there's no way for us to answer every question that everyone has right now in this room. And so I personally am the person who is typing out every single question. And so there's names and emails. So we have been after many times agencies, we send them to get that information.
When I read them, be like, she said,
Their questions.
I might not be here to read it, but I want to make sure.
There's no perfect way. Good
God is going to make sure.
So as you get your food,
Go ahead now.
that means you can keep the flow
Anyone else
going.
here?
I don't
So again, after you get your food,
I'm not involved.
if you
Just
can
so you're not-
on the schedule, monitor your life, control the flow, and get back to your question. Thank you very much.
Oh, good.
I just like to eat it.
Yeah, that's good. So, oh, you're good.
Do
you need a chair?
In the past, before the internet came, and you had full-time, two full-time newspapers. There were full-time reporters, one that would focus on fire, one would focus on park and recreation, and one would focus on city council. So you had the staff in like, you're not seeing it as they all and there's no longer the but what we have to do is file ethics complaint. Sometimes you do. I'll give you a situation. I was called in by my five the CEO they hired became suspicious that he lied about the rate. He wrote cash reserves from 700 days down to 10 days. I did the investigation. So now he lied about his PhD, didn't have 250 published. He lied about carrying a profit at the end of the business. He went public and we got it. And I got the 10:27 to go by. He's in a 3-day series. If to do that again, sometimes it's difficult. That's what it Oh yeah, true. So, and that's why here. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I can stand by the story. I've got the 9 months. I can point everything, and it raises all sorts of questions. So we have to figure a way how we can make that and to carry it. We may have to hold our own meetings and raise it. And in the best way,
Can we talk about math for a second? Let's do the math. So you spend $40 on a program, Costco, right? You didn't get the pizza there. You got to spend a glass of nickel. It's over $400. Everybody knows the pizza at Costco is going to be cheaper, and it's still going to.
I've never seen $40
of pizza. I don't think
I didn't attend the meeting last night, but I am
$26
going
million in debt, and we spend $400 on pizza.
Yeah, I know. It's one I hear it. The other way to do it is like, here's the I like this though. Really, remember, 4 or 5 people in the front city council. You don't have that. If you want to have it, at some point,
But this room,
candidates.
you know this room wasn't
Say, but I'm thinking about it. Let it be known. Every alder district, you would come next month. No. You get your neighborhood association together and say, we want you to run against so-and-so next time. You just think about it. Right. And so John simply puts up the exploratory committee, goes online, John from Madison, right? And I'm thinking about running for the X district. That sends a message that you're coming over. It does. Yeah, and same thing with the same thing. There's something that about 6. Knowing they have to step in every priority. They introduce a resolution in the council resolution wanted to raise all the salaries by 60%. 60%. And it needed 15 votes. It lost by 1 vote. There's only 6 alders who voted against it. And to me, that's another issue. How can you talk about the deficit and how you want to raise salaries? And especially after 2021, when the voters turned it down, increased pay and I totally agree. We used to get $100 a month, and we used to meet every week. And now they meet every other week. They give you more authority and the bureaucracy. If you don't meet every single week, and then you assign and all the be responsible for that agency, that's what we used to do. And then we'd get together and work.
you can also argue for
because they come to the council, they think they want to they want to just help. They don't want to worry about anything else.
Trying to back out.
I'm not good at that. I need you to take a photo.
A photo? Yeah.
Joy! Joy! We gotta get a photo. Look at all these different, like, Wisconsin, all these different Wisconsin journalists. Get a photo. Journalists. Well, yes, absolutely. Wisconsin journalists.
Wisconsin journalist. Look this way, David. Gotcha.
All right, thank you.
We've never actually met. I think we're based in the Friends Miles, but so your show when it was on many years. Is Kathleen still on it? No.
She retired with Henry Dunn retired.
Yeah, I know.
So we had a bunch of us retired.
Yeah.
Kathleen Dunn and I both the talk director at the time on the same day that we were retired. We got the It was. Are you on the No, I was. Well, good.
Yeah, I mean, If you look, just go on YouTube and type in WI radio, it's Wisconsin International Radio, live streaming this right now.
Well, I can't write. He doesn't know when I'm ready, and I gotta go invite somebody else to do
But yeah, I mean, this is the exact same size room, if not the exact same size room we used 4 months ago for the subway issue, and they knew then that it wasn't big enough, and they were told, you need to accommodate for ADA, and you need to have a room. And then what do? They found this room that's like get in off the corner.
Even to construct an agenda, it does not provide the opportunity for true dialogue with some give and take, and most importantly, this is a democracy. These are my elected officials, and the only way. So I would love to do that.
Absolutely.
Can I look for you?
Yeah.
I do apology. I have been one spot and I see
Please get back to your tables and your seats. So we can go into the next phase of this, which is asking and answering questions. You all are such beautiful people. You all are such beautiful people. Thank you so very much.
Pat yourself on the back.
The next phase, and I know that all of you want to make sure that you hear every question that is asked and also every question that is answered. And what we're asking is that please make sure that you are allowed. You may not agree with the answer or the ask, but please make sure, as the Vice President said, is that we are respectful. This is a full house, and I applaud you for cooperating with us as we had to do some shifts. So now we are going to move into the Q&A. These are the questions that you wrote on your card. And I will, what's the next page? Is that it? I'm not supposed to be here, so they didn't tell me what.
So we're going to have 45 minutes of questions and answers, and then after that we'll go on to the next phase of the meeting. So Dave, I hand it over to you, or whoever is going to be asking questions.
I couldn't read.
Question number 1.
Oh.
Are we ready? How much would be saved if alders gave back their raises? Why did this happen? Raise, granted, given budget.
Thank you for that question. The council has looked at increasing their pay a couple of times, I think, over the last few years. Those have not been enacted. So I think the last time council pay was increased, other than sort of, there's a provision in the ordinance where there's a cost of living adjustment every few years or so. But I think the last time it was increased might have been in 15 or so, or 2017. So there's been no increases since 2017.
But for the information of the public, in January meeting of this year, many of the council members who are here asked for a 60% increase. And it took 15
Sure,
votes.
so we'll go through the questions. The questions are, the
60%
question
increase.
was, what was the increase? There's been no increase enacted. There have been proposals. There have been a variety of proposals. That's true. Let's go on to the next one.
Next question. Why does Madison get lowest amount of state and federal shared revenue in Wisconsin? Can this be changed?
That's a great question, thank you, Walter. So state aid to Madison, I'll start a little bit with history and then I'll kind of get to how we got to today. So the way that the state finances local government and schools in Wisconsin is primarily through trying to make tax bases the same throughout the state. So it sort of starts with the property tax, and it says if a community has more property value per student or per resident than another part of the state, more state aid will go to the place that has less property value than a part of the state that has more property value. Madison has higher property value per student or per resident than much of the state. And so that's a portion of why we get less state aid. Now for the city, there was a program that distributed money on that basis. That formula ended in the year 2000. The state then in 2003 faced a massive budget deficit. Part of how they balanced that budget deficit was they cut aid to cities and other local governments. Madison took a disproportionate share of that cut. State aid was cut again 2 years later. State aid was cut again in 2011. So Madison received about $10 million of state aid in the year 2000. Prior to this most recent state budget, the city was getting around $6 million. If we had increased in inflation since the year 2000, we should be getting $17 million. Now, there was a recent increase in shared revenue in the most recent state budget. $275 million was really a historic increase. The legislature, though, set up the distribution of that money to disadvantage Madison. They gave most of the money to towns and small cities. Madison got the smallest share per capita of any city in the state. You put that all together, Madison gets $29 per resident. The average statewide is $142. That is a big part of why we're at where we're at today. So, thank you for that question.
Why, how can such a vibrant, growing city like Madison be in such financial trouble? What happens if referendum is rejected?
Thank you for that question. So part of it is what I just described in terms of the amount of state aid that Madison receives. And then the way that the state has structured the revenues that come in to pay for the services that residents expect and want in Madison. And so the cost of those services really goes up faster than the revenues are allowed to increase. And the It's a whole complicated formula the state has set up, but basically it looks at how much value of new buildings we add every year. It has not much connection to inflation or population growth or anything like that. And so we don't have a sales tax like the county has or the state has. We don't have an income tax. It's better connected to what's happening in the economy. And so while our costs to maintain the current services are going up, those revenues don't sort of follow with that. And that's been the case since 2011, when the state took a number of measures basically to balance their own budget. One was the state aid cut I talked about. One is to put these strict limits on local revenues. And the third was to change for the relationship between employees and managers through what was called Act 10. So all those things happened in 2011, and the city has had that gap for every year since then. The rate of growth in revenues doesn't keep pace with the rate of growth in expenditures. Now, we've done a series of measures every year to address that. I listed some of those in my presentation. The pandemic really kind of made it worse in terms of that growth in revenues. So the state recovered really quickly, the county recovered really quickly, we've not recovered as quickly. And so we have a larger gap now as we look forward. We've gotten through the last few years with federal pandemic aid. That's been helpful to maintain city services, and we've used some one-time monies. But now we need to look out into the future, and we don't have those on an ongoing basis to maintain ongoing programs. So it's really a choice now of, do we keep the services at the current level? Do we look at revenues? A combination of the two. So that's where we're at. Thank you for that question.
Since we are restricted by the state, what can we do to change the laws so that we can charge local sales tax? Maybe change, fancy writing here, maybe change, increase taxes and change state aid, one per resident. Why is it difficult to change state law? Many communities have local sales tax. Why can't Madison have it?
That's a great question. I wish I had an easy answer. That's really up to what the legislature does. There's 99 members of the state assembly and 33 members of the state senate, and you have to have a majority in each of those houses to change or adopt new laws. I will say that Governor Evers in his most recent budget has proposed allowing cities to levy a half-cent sales tax, just like counties do. That was has been rejected by the legislature. The governor proposed an increase in shared revenue in his most recent budget that would have provided over $20 million to the city. The legislature chose a different way of distributing that new state aid and didn't provide as much of an increase as the governor proposed. So there have been efforts. The city is always talking with its representatives, its delegation. We talk with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. We work on these things, but the legislature has chosen not to provide that option. And we cannot do it on our own. We need to have a change in state law to allow that to happen.
With all due respect, this type of forum does not allow the public to give input and their perspective. When the children of this school go to a school board meeting, they're allowed to ask questions and even swear at people like Mary Burke, and we allow the children at the school board meetings to do that, but the taxpayers have to write this all out.
So thank you very much. And so in this space, the applauding, right? And so So in this space, I've been at the school board meeting. This will not end like the school board meeting, first of all. The other point is that people took time to write out their questions.
But they wanted to give input.
Sir, please let her respond.
And so the people took time to write out these questions. Now, if you have specific input or questions, follow-up, jot those down. But we will get through this stack. You will still have the opportunity to ask your question. We're not trying to avoid you asking your questions, but it has to be orderly. It has to be orderly. There's a lot of people in this room with a lot of questions. And every time you interrupt me, then we don't get through these so that I can put these cards aside and we can get to exactly why people are here. Can we work that way? Thank you. Okay, how will you make decisions about community services knowing that service supports city priorities as a whole? The decision you are about to make about your budget will ultimately affect all communities drastically. As a community-centered leader, the sooner we know about, let me go back. As a community-centered leader, the sooner we know about decisions, the sooner we can make much-needed provisions to serve our participants.
Thank you for that question. I think that's about the process and where it'll be going from here. This is one part of the process, these questions and what you'll be doing later in the meeting in terms of sharing priorities and values. And then there will be, I think, additional outreach and engagement meetings. The council meets every other week, basically, and takes testimony then. The finance committee will meet as well. So there'll be a number of ways that this will be communicated over the next weeks and months.
Is the construction of the BRT adding to the deficit?
No.
So the BRT or bus rapid transit is primarily, is a capital project in that sense of there are buses being purchased. There are some road work being done to accommodate the bus rapid transit lanes. There are stations being built. The state or the city is receiving, the east-west project is a cost of a little over $200 million, with about 80% of that paid for by the federal government. 20% of it is coming from various local sources. Some of that is from tax increment financing districts, some from other local contributions, some donation of land value, and so on. That's all primarily financed the local share with debt. That is not a part of what we're talking about here with the operating budget. Metro Transit did a redesign of their routes to accommodate bus rapid transit within their sort of current revenue structure. And so the operating side is not, the issue with what's causing the gap that we're talking about here. That's a capital budget item, and as I mentioned, that money for BRT, whether it's federal dollars or local dollars, cannot be used for the operating budget.
What is it, well, let me ask the question and you can answer. What is the impact of BRT on the budget in future year deficits?
Yeah, again, other than that cost of living growth, so bus drivers need to be paid, has address cost of living growth, benefit costs, and so on, just as every other city employee. We have to accommodate those costs. So a portion of that is what we're looking at in terms of the costs in the future to maintain current service levels. And so in that sense, just like the police department, the fire department, public health, streets, and so on, it's all a part of that calculation, forecast of what we're looking at in terms of the cost of current services versus the allowable growth in revenue.
What special programs are in the budget? How much does the special programs cost, and how will they be supported?
I'm sorry, I don't know how to answer special programs, so sorry.
Money was spent on EV buses that never worked. How much did this cost, and is there a way to overcome this?
We'll probably need to get back to the person on that one, or we'll answer it in a general FAQ, but I don't think we've actually started running any EV buses and have not taken any into the city yet in terms of operating them.
What happens if you go to referendum and it comes back with a no vote? What is a backup plan?
We have to have that backup plan. There's no question about that. We'll be developing that alongside other options. We've talked about reducing services is clearly an option. There are a limited array of other revenue options. They're very limited. So if a referendum is not the path, we'll have to develop a path that might include larger spending reductions, for example, service reductions, and so on.
What is the biggest threat to Madison's budget and future growth?
Satya.
I think there's a lot of challenges each year with delivering services. I think the biggest threat continues to be that to provide the level of services, the amount of revenues that are allowed, and clearly the reliance on the property tax is something really set up under state law. We can't change it. Most cities have a sales tax or another option to help with paying for the services that residents want. And so I think some of the threats out there are what happens, does the legislature do other things? In the most recent budget, the legislature put in a requirement to basically direct that the budget not make any reductions to police and fire services. And you saw the largest share of the budget is police and fire services. And so we have to balance the budget through reductions. That's another sort of threat to how we put this together. So a lot of this is around what the state legislature does.
What about the new bus system? Doesn't the federal funding end with construction?
So the federal funding is for construction and for acquisition of buses and so on. And once we pay for those, we have them, we operate the system. After that, we don't need that federal money anymore once the system's been constructed. The operations, as I said, that's been sort of accommodated within the route redesign that Metro went through, and then that cost of living and cost of services in the future is accounted for in those future forecasts.
And this might be an answer. How expensive will that be?
So in the current budget, Metro's budget, total budget is around $70 million a year. That's the operating budget for Metro. Some of that budget comes from the federal aid that we receive every year to help operate the system. The state provides around $18 million of that $70 million every year. We collect fares, whether it's through people putting money in the fare box or buying passes. There's the vehicle registration fee that raises about $7 million. That's all dedicated to operating the transit system. And then Metro provides services to partner communities. So Verona, Fitchburg, those partner communities pay some money into the system for operations, as does the school district and the university. And then finally, from the general fund, in this year's budget, the amount of subsidy that's provided to transit is about $15 million. Now, I will say that when you look, again, around the country, most transit systems are operated through a regional transit authority that are usually not funded from the property tax. They're funded from a sales tax or local gas tax or other non-property tax options. So again, that's another area where state law kind of forces how transit is supported. And in this case, that's the amount that comes from the property tax to help support the operation of the transit system.
Can the budget start from zero and add each item instead of blanket costs to continue?
Yeah, that's a great question. Clearly, zero-based budgeting is one approach. We're also looking at outcome budgeting, which is another approach, and putting that into place where you look at performance indicators, services, and results that residents expect, and really connecting that to the budget. We're realigning all of our services right now to help support that effort. When we do the cost to continue, we kind of use that term very broadly, but it is a very detailed review of the budget. So we look at what's being spent in each object code line. What I mean by an object code is, what's the cost of software? What's the cost of trash pickup in the parks? What's the cost of contract to provide a community service? All of that is reviewed, and then we add that up in the cost to continue. So a part of that is that effort. Some of that is also reviewing the services each year. Sometimes we have asked agencies to look at reduction proposals. So there have been a number of ways the budget's been reviewed. Maybe not exactly zero-based budgeting, but along those lines.
And we're almost through our cards, and we'll save some time for your questions. How will the discovered $31.2 million in extra revenue from 2023 affect the 2025 budget and the proposed referendum?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. So definitely, good news from 2023. I ran through that in my presentation. And what I want to emphasize is that's one-time money. And so what we've got is an ongoing issue with how much revenue we're able to collect each year under state law and so on, and what the cost of services are. Now that the level of those services can clearly change, but that's what we have right now. If we spend that one-time money in that 1 year, the deficit will just reappear in the next year. So can that one-time money maybe be a part of an overall plan? Certainly, but it's not going to address the long-term issue of that each year gap that we talked about in the presentation. Thank you.
How do city managers measure the success of human services programs so alders can make budget decisions?
That's a great question. Again, probably one we'll look at adding to an FAQ because it's pretty involved, but there's a community services committee. There are contracts with performance measures in them with all of the community services agencies. There's a process through which each of those agencies and the programs and services they provide are reviewed each year. And there are some evaluations around that, some performance measures with that. So there is a high degree of review, a lot of input from those who sit on those committees as well as the council. But we can look at that in more detail in an FAQ.
Where can the public view the measurables of success for our human service programs?
Again, we'll put that into FAQ, but some of that information is on the city's Community Development Division website. They put that information, some of that information out there, but we can get into that in more detail in a follow-up FAQ.
Has any thought been given to cutting non-essential activities, i.e. alter travel trips, lavish food at, I'm just reading, alter travel trips, lavish food at events, putting match funds, $4 million into for-profit enterprises like Breeze Stevens?
Well, the council can certainly look at its budget. They're the legislative branch, that's up to them to decide how they want to proceed with that. On the case of the $4 million for improvements at Breeze Stevens, that is a capital item. Certainly that can be looked at. The council, finance committee, I think just reviewed it. The council can take a look at it. And, but again, that's not going to address what we're talking about here, whether that money is or isn't provided for that improvement.
How much did the food cost for tonight's meeting?
Apparently $400.
And 40 for the cookies. Should have got them all at Costco.
Many resolutions seem to be considered without a complete fiscal note. Why and how?
There's a fiscal note prepared for every resolution. If there is a fiscal effect or an appropriation effect. Sometimes there are separate memos prepared to go into a lot more detail associated with that. But every resolution and ordinance has a fiscal note.
What is the annual debt payment for the city? And how has that changed over the past few years?
So debt service as a share of the general fund budget is about 17% of the budget. That has increased over the last few years as the capital budget has increased. The total dollar amount is a little over $60 million per year. We pay our debt back primarily within 10 years. That's faster than the state and most communities around the country. So that's a part of our AAA bond rating. We pay our debt back fast. So that's a good thing from a financial perspective. But any reduction in that debt service or slowing of it does not help the operating budget under the way that the state has set up restrictions on property taxes.
What is the estimated impact of BRT on the city's annual budget once BRT is fully operating? Madison needs to stop new spending until such time that deficit has been eliminated. What anticipated spending can department managers identify or eliminate?
Well, that's certainly going to be part of the process. Not increasing spending is a reduction in services. So that's the trade-off. In the end, if you're going to not increase the spending for the cost of health insurance, the cost of pensions, the cost of living adjustments, and so on, and just inflation in the supplies and equipment budget, then something else has to be reduced, and that means services will be reduced. That's been looked at by agencies. I identified some of the costs of some of the services, and so those are the things that will possibly be looked at if the approach is to not increase spending as an option.
Madison had open, unfilled positions in 2023 with no discernible drop in service levels. These positions can be eliminated or reduced to part-time for ongoing cost savings. Can Madison's Human Resource Department identify those positions?
So when I talked about staff turnover, that means that people left positions and then people came into those positions. It's not that those positions remain vacant throughout the year. So the savings occurred because somebody left, and in many instances, the person who may have left was paid at a certain level because they've been with the city for a number of years, and the budget had them at that level because we take a snap, we set up the budget based on what we know at that time. If somebody leaves at that higher level and somebody's hired at an entry level, we're gonna have a savings. That doesn't mean that the position's been vacant for the entire year. It means there's been a series of staff departures and staff hiring throughout the year. And the pace of that increased or was at a higher level in 23 than we anticipated. But we've really accounted for that in the 2024 budget. We made changes in how we budget for turnover, and we've really addressed that. Plus, that rate of turnover is declining.
How much of the deficit is related to new expenditures as it relates to a base year of 2020? If we knew we had a structural deficit, why were new spendings put in place?
Thanks for that question. There has been an increase since 2020. There's no doubt about that. A lot of that has been in staff pay increases and benefits. A portion of that is really the result of what happened, sort of the outcome of what happened with Act 10 in 2011. And we had police and fire commission staff get a rate of pay increase that outpaced the rest of city employees, and that gap became about 6%. And there was an effort made since 2020 to close that gap, and the gap is closed in 2024. There have been some new programs added, the CARES program, the community response program for CARES for behavioral health type of issues. That's a new program. And some positions have been added, for example, in parks to address better access to parks programs and better coordinate those programs. So there have been some positions added in the budget, but the city has also been growing since 2020 at the fastest pace in the state. And so those considerations also need to be balanced as well.
If you cannot eliminate the Police Civilian Oversight Board in its $509,000 annual budget, you don't deserve $1 of state aid. I'm just reading the card.
Certainly is one program in the city budget.
How is land value determined, assessed? Start with that one now.
So assessment of land, I'm not the expert on that, the city assessor is, and I will, the city assessor is actually giving a presentation to the council at the Tuesday council meeting, so you may want to tune in to that, and you'll get a really good background on how the assessment process works. But very, very generally, it's really about what's happening in the market. Right. What sales are happening, home prices, new construction in the city, improvements. So it might be, for example, building permits issued. They look at those building permits and say, well, you added a bathroom or you improved something with your house. That's a portion of the assessment process. And we have seen in the last couple of years pretty rapid growth in assessments. Some of that's because people are moving to Madison. They're buying homes at well above maybe assessed value, and that's happening not only in Madison but other parts of the country. But that generally is what it is. The city assessor can go into that in a lot more detail, but a lot of it is really about sales, market, and things like that in terms of assessments.
With the city funding nice to have, projects like the public market, it is difficult to take seriously the current deficit. City leaders need to take a hard look at these unnecessary projects.
So those are clearly priorities around the capital budget, and the council and the mayor review that, but I'll just say again, what's happening in the capital budget and any sort of reductions in the capital budget does not address what we're talking about here with the operating budget. So whatever you're sort of, it's clearly an issue around debt service, there's no doubt about that, and it does affect the property tax overall, but that savings is not kind of transferable to address the operating budget. That's just the way it's set up under state law.
Do you have a deficit list of expenditures prioritized from necessary to nice? A default, excuse me, let me read that. Do you have a default list of expenditures prioritized from necessary to nice?
That's definitely the budget process that we go through each year, and we'll be starting that process with the agencies next month. The mayor reviews the budget and really looks at it in that way that you just said. What are the priorities, and how do we move forward with the budget with that level of services, and our reduction is going to be a part of that.
So we have gone through the questions, and now I think that there is, before I turn it back over to...
Several of ours weren't read.
Wait, hold on. Yeah. So we can't have it both ways. There was an ask to have questions from the floor. We can't go through all of those questions and have them both. So you have to choose. We have time. If you want to ask a specific question, you can line up here and we can address those, but we can't go through 100+ cards. You can't have it both ways. So hold on, you decide. You decide. Okay, you decide.
Open dialogue.
Open dialogue.
Okay. Open dialogue. Let me set the ground rules. Line up here. I'll give you the microphone. It will be orderly. If it's not, see, that's why they don't give me the microphone, because I say what I say when I got it. All right? It has to be orderly. A question asked and a question answered. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of the reasons why we are answering the questions based on the cards are some of those questions are repetitive. And each and every one of you, if you have your questions answered, then we're going to be here for 2 years. So I want you guys to have grace. We will answer as much questions as we can. Dave did a great job on answering those questions, and Barbara of the McKinney did a great job on reading those questions. So can we just give them a round of applause, please? And like Alder McKinney said, we have to have ground rules. And we cannot answer all the questions. So be patient with us. Thank you.
It's now $3.80 for the pizza.
that include the tip?
Thank you. My name is Miles Kristen. I'm actually here with Nino Amato, and he and I have been documenting over the last 2 years the Dairy Drive encampment where several homeless people have died. They allowed residents to shoot heroin. I've said this on record. And we've spent over $10 million there. This place is a complete disaster, and I just want to know, with all of the different aldermen there, we've got Tag way up there and some more aldermen back there, is there one alderman who can justify giving another penny to Brenda Kunkel, Mach 1 Health, in this boondoggle of a disaster?
I think that was a statement. That was a statement.
Is there one alderman willing to give that organization another dime, considering homeless people are dying there?
I have one question.
No answer.
In the past, since 2011.
They're dying there.
You've been dealing with, Mr. Schmidtke, a structural deficit. My question is, in these 13 years, why have you not figured out how to solve that problem and solve it so that we're not sitting here 13 years later talking about an ongoing issue that should have been solved, oh, I don't know, 10 years ago?
Thanks for that question. So we have addressed it in every budget, and can't address it in an ongoing way because I talked about that, the structure of revenue in the city, and the pandemic had severe economic effects on the city's revenues, and we're not set up in a way to recover from that like other governments are, like the state and the county. We're at a point now where, because of that, and the money that we receive from the federal government is coming to an end, we have a choice now of level of services, or additional revenue, or some combination of that.
If I can just add to that, in 2011, the cost of service in the capital budget was around 11%, or 17%. And it does, in fact, the operation. The question about Dairy Drive is the city agreed to spend $10.5 million to build a fenced-in encampment and build 8-by-8-foot huts. No toilets. Since then, at least 4 people died of drug overdose. We're trying to get information on how many more. We projected that it could double. Brenda Kunkel has received over $3 million for Mach 1. Her Mach 1 office, I went yesterday, is closed. I've checked all their 990s. They're incomplete and inadequate. And the question is, are you going to continue paying Mach 1 when these individuals could end up going into the new shelter, rather than paying Brenda Kunkel, who runs Progressive Dane, that has endorsed most of the council and the mayor?
So let me just interrupt here, is that our president, please stand, of the exec, please stand. Thank you. And our vice president, please come. Some of those questions that we will not be able to answer in this space will be answered within the executive committee. We can't answer your question about Dairy Drive, but absolutely I will ask her to put that on the agenda for discussion.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Josh. One thing I didn't see in the presentation for increasing revenues was net new construction. And considering that we have very low vacancy in Madison for both apartments and houses, I was wondering what we could do to increase the level of construction within the city that can increase revenues. Thank you.
So thanks for that question about new construction. In terms of how that impacts the levy limit, which is what I can speak to, You know, again, the way the formula is set up by the state legislature, even if we were to double the amount of new construction, which is probably not even possible, we maybe add another $3 to $4 million in revenue. So just to keep that in context. In terms of the development process, again, we can address that in FAQ. I don't have all of the background on that to answer this evening, but those issues are always reviewed by Planning, Community, and Economic Development in terms of the pace, but also what is set up under ordinance and so on in terms of that process. So there is a legal process with that and a legislative process as well.
Just want to have a reminder, we only have 15 minutes left, and all the questions that you wrote down in the postcards will be answered. We have your emails, we have your contact, and we'll be in touch with you. The council office will summarize, and we'll be sending it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for showing up, and this was a lot, very insightful for me. I have up the operating budget by function from the city's website for 2023 and 2024, and I'm looking at the line item for transportation. And I looked at this before and noticed there was a $14,878,362 increase from 2023 to 2024, mainly due to Metro. What is being done about that from 2024 to 2025?
Sure, that's a great question. We explained that in detail during that budget, and you can go to the city budget website and look at the budget detail for 2023 for the explanation of that. But it was primarily a technical adjustment, and it allowed Metro to access more federal money, doing it that way. And so we reduced the subsidy. It was higher in 2022. We reduced it in 2023. That way, Metro could say to the federal government, we need more federal money. So it was really a way for the city to benefit by getting more federal dollars. And then we had to put that money back in, plus pay back that one-time reduction that benefited the general fund. So that's what's happening from that 1 year to the next. It's really a technical adjustment to try to capture more federal dollars.
And from 2024 to 2025, what's the projected increase?
So that'll be, we're still looking at that in terms of that, what the cost of living and cost of inflation and contracts and so on.
Excuse me, my name is Mikhail. The pizza is fantastic. Thank you for that. $400, I think it was. My question is, when we talk about zero-based budgeting, instead of asking, how can we fund something, we should be asking why. Why are we funding this? We don't want to be taxed out of our homes. Like, there's a lot of anxiety about that. There's a lot of concerns. So I'm saying, why? Why are we funding this? And I think that's what the city needs to be doing. Thank you. And thanks for the pizza.
Thank you.
I mean, I think that's clearly a perspective. We've said that, there's level of service, there's revenues.
Yes.
Those are the options that need to be explored and looked at in developing the budget for 2025 and beyond. Because this is not a next year program or issue only, but a year after and year after. So understand where that's coming from. We're presenting basically that landscape, and that is definitely an option around fewer services rather than more revenue to continue the current level of services.
Thank you for doing this tonight. It's exceedingly helpful. So my name is Laura Scandura, and I have a comment and a question. And my comment is, can we strike the word structural deficit from our vocabulary? And the reason for that is I'm an economist by training, and we're not actually talking about a structural deficit. What we're talking about are decisions that not our current elected officials, but our former elected officials over several years the decisions they made to approve certain programs where our expenditures were greater than our revenues. So what we're really talking about is decision-making on the part of our elected officials, not a structural deficit. So my request is that we ban that from our vocabulary. And then my question is really about process, because as you can see from the number of people who are here tonight, this is a contentious issue. People are concerned about it. Everyone, I'm sure, wants to work together to look for a solution. So what is the process that the City Council, jointly with the city government, has put in place to come up with a policy framework that's going to help us develop solutions to this problem over time? Because we can cut this, we can cut that, but this is an ongoing challenge. So how is it that you're going to go through that process to create a policy framework that reflects the concerns that you're hearing from your constituents tonight? Thank you.
Yes.
Bravo.
To address the question, that's kind of why we're here. I laid out what the process is. We have put in a lot of detail around how the budget is put together. There's an information series at the city budget website. We've engaged the council. They established a set of guiding principles through resolution, and they're here tonight to listen to you. So that'll be a part of informing those next steps as the next year's budget is developed over the summer, and the council continues to talk about what are the priorities for the budget moving forward.
And just as a follow-up, if I may, I mean, the question that I was trying to ask was more about policy creation and how that, because you have a process in place, but what I'm really asking is how are those hard decisions going to be made, and how is a framework going to be created so that they can be executed over several years?
Right.
We will go through the process I just laid out. That is, will establish the framework. I mentioned issues around outcome budgeting, for example. And ultimately, that's what the mayor and the council together are going to have to identify in terms of balancing the budget. What is it? What are the values and priorities around that? That is a policy construct. And that will then be also put into place, that those guiding principles that I referenced that the council adopted included creating a framework around long-range planning. So thanks for that question.
Good evening. My name is James Steinbach, and I appreciate you coming. My question is about people. I think we all agree that people, our staff, is our most important asset, or whatever word we use. I know that in my life I've had to do layoffs, and I suspect many people in this room have been on one side or another of that. Companies do it all the time, and I'm not happy about it. But I wish that you did not start with the premise that there will be no staff reductions. I don't think that's a smart way to go. It's painful, but it's not smart.
Thank you for that.
Okay, hi, my name is Jay Russell. I want to say thank you for the presentation. Thanks for everybody for being here. I think it's a great idea to exchange these ideas. The question I have is, can revenue be raised by corporate naming rights for parks, vehicles, whatever? Is that being considered? Is that limited? Does anybody want to do that?
Frank Production,
I think you answered your question. I'm not trying to answer much more beyond that. Do you want to do it? I think those are policy issues that the council needs to grapple with. That's definitely, I think, looked at. It only really works in certain contexts, I think. So let's say something related to a golf course or something like that. I will say that, I don't know if you are aware of the Glen Golf Park, that was really all privately financed. So somebody came in and paid for that, and the public gets the benefit from it. The city didn't pay for those improvements, but we collect the revenue on it each day for people who come and golf, to help the golf enterprise. So I think there's one example that, that's not going to solve this problem in terms of its magnitude and just paying for everyday services. But great point.
Okay, there's nothing stopping this from
There's
happening.
nothing that...
No state regulation that says you can't do that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I just wanted to introduce myself and say one really important thing. I am Alder Amani Latimer-Burris. I'm on the north side, and we're going to go last on June 5th. So I appreciate you all coming out and taking your time to talk to us. And someone had asked about the policy and how we're going to develop things. So I don't know, the city council office is the first time in history that this has ever been done. And the big white pieces of paper that are here, we need you to write your commentary down, your questions down, your complaints, your things that you don't believe, things that you're suspicious about. And what the city council office is going to do is summarize all of that for us alders, so we'll have it on the floor when we're talking about the budget. Because it's not our values, we're just a conduit for you. And if we don't hear from you on this white piece of paper, like, if we don't do that, then it doesn't exist, because that value is not there. We want to know if you hate the public market, write it down. I hate the public market because it's a total waste of time. If you love something or you're willing to have more for garbage collection, I'm making that up, then write that down. Write your questions down. The staff, our city council staff, is working directly with finance, and they're doing a fantastic job. This is all put together really fast, because when we got educated about the budget, we were like, we don't really know in depth what the values are. So that's where your $15,000 is going.
On markers?
We just have 5 more minutes, so I have to, answer these 2 questions.
My name is Jackie Ubenheimer, and thank you for this session. I'm also expressing some disappointment because there are not very many elders here. I wish more would have taken the time to listen to their constituents directly. My question is, as I was listening to the presentation, looking at the big items like police, fire, transportation, I come up with about $224 million budget, or expenditures in that area. Where do the remaining 180 or so go? So thank you.
Yeah, before I give the microphone to David, we have a lot of elders here. Can you raise your hands? Here you go, 9 of us. And also, this is specifically for West Side elders, and all of us are here. So I just want to make that note. So thank you.
I think the question was about what the components of the budget. I did cover that in the presentation, and you can see the presentation online. I think it's also at your table, but the largest is police and fire and public health, debt service, public works, so streets, parks, the transportation, which is metro, traffic engineering, planning, community, and economic development, so that's our planning division, our building inspection unit division, community development, economic development, the library, and the cost of administration, the general government, and so on. Those are all the components that add up to the $405 million for the budget.
Thank you. So I want to ask about the police budget part of this. It looked like almost 80 million was to personnel, and you don't have to answer this now, but I'd love a follow-up FAQ where kind of that exactly goes. And then also looking at that, I noted that the community outreach was almost 2 million, which is 10% of this deficit, and that could be one place that could be looked at. So I'm hoping that you can answer kind of more information about the breakdown of the FAQ.
Sure, we can do that. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. And my name is Rita Uterly, and I have a question about neighborhood associations. I didn't hear them mentioned at all in conjunction with the process. So we have approximately 138 or 140 neighborhood associations. How how are you working with them? I know the city's trying to neutralize some of those, but how are you working with them now to get some more grassroots input on the budget problems? Thank you.
Hi, Karen Kapusta, Hopewell Common Council Chief of Staff. Thank you so much for that question. I actually think it's really wonderful. We are very fortunate that our alders are very much connected to the neighborhood associations. And going forward, we would like to continue with that process. So I want to see the folks from the neighborhood associations communicating to alders and inviting them to their meetings, to have a conversation, and sending an email. So I encourage you to do so.
Last question. Last one.
I really want to thank the city for being a platinum bike community. It's fabulous, and we have wonderful bike connectivity in town. But I'm wondering, with the budget deficit as it is, why would we continue funding more bike paths in the Platinum City and bridges and things where the community isn't supporting them at this time? And why is money going towards that when we already are a wonderful platinum biking city?
So I think that the short answer here, so there's two things. One is, getting this information down is really important for us because the alders need to know, and we're collecting all of this information and we're providing it to the alders from all of these sessions. And so they need to know, oh, this is a very big concern. Folks are really wanting to sort of slow down on capital spending. Capital budget and operating budget are different, you know that. So unfortunately, while it's a good idea to look at that capital budget, and in fact, the agency requests are out now. So I recommend you all take a look at the website. That QR code will help you get there to see what the agencies are proposing for the 2025 capital budget, and let your alders know your thoughts on that. So that's one thing, but unfortunately that doesn't really help us solve an operating structural deficit, unfortunately. But it's still worth digging into, and I think that it's really important that folks do and let their alders know. Okay, so I just encourage it.
So at this time, I would like to invite all the alders who are here, and then the West Side alders to give us a closing statement. So all the alders, please. We really appreciate them coming, but also we really appreciate you coming. And this session will be used as a process to evaluate some of the priorities for our alders, but also for you. And all the information that you shared will be evaluated and will be in touch with you. So if you can get hold of your alder, this event was organized by District 1 Alder John Duncan, myself, Alder Wahelia, District 7, Nikki, District 9, Alder Yvera, District 19, and Alder Harrington McKinney, District 20. One thing I want to say tonight is we heard you. Initially, the format was not like this. We were supposed to sit down with you and ask questions in those forms. But you asked us to modify and hear from you live, and we modified that, so we really appreciate it.
Well, John, you're here. This is the beginning of a process. There are going to be more opportunities involved. Now, one of the things that you heard tonight was that we're really creating two budgets. One that countenances some amount of a referendum and the process, a budget, if you will, that there's no referendum. In that process of producing that, we'll be developing some commentaries on exactly how much we might have to cut on different budgets and what that means for the services that would be cut. And what will be really useful for additional resident input, because it's hard to respond until you know what that is. But when we get that out, when we have that messaging campaign to look at what services might be cut, then your help in prioritizing things that need the most across the city will be extremely useful for the council to make its decisions. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Again, this is Nikki Conklin, the auditor of the 9th District. I just want to thank everybody for taking this time to be here tonight to give your input. It is very valuable. If you did not get your question answered, or if you have other questions that come up, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, District 9 at City of Madison, or all alders, ALLALDERS, at cityofmadison.com. Thank you guys for being here.
Will any of you support continued funding to the Dairy Drive encampment? Will you continue to support the funding of Dairy Drive?
So I want to thank you all for people that are here from District 1. If you have questions and you want to come over here afterwards and talk with me, please feel free to come and talk. I am glad that we were able to have city staff here for as long as they have been here, answering the questions that you all had. We have 3 more of these meetings that will be taking place the last week of May. One of them is hybrid, so if you want to join that one, you can join that, or you can go to the other 2 live ones. We do appreciate you all coming out and for being here tonight.
Not one alder is willing to support a place that we are spending $10 million on, that homeless people are dying at because they are allowed to shoot heroin.
We heard, and we'll be communicating with you. Thank you for your time. Good night.
Turn your back.
Excuse me. We just want to hear you.
Sure.
But whatever you have sent all alders, we take this into the executive committee if you have specific questions.
But my question right here, you're all right here right now, is do you support continued financial support?
We don't know because we have to analyze it. We have to evaluate.
But we
have to evaluate the program.
But we're talking about it's a program that we're spending $10 million on, where people are dying because we allow them to shoot heroin.
Do we have facts and numbers and?
Yes.
Oh, we have. Why don't you send me?
Well, how are you not aware of this? This is a one place where $10 million has been spent.
Why don't you send us?
Biden Rescue Funds.
Huh?
Biden Rescue Funds. They used to build the facility.
I remember.
And they've given over $5 million of rental time. I've got their 990s here. If you want to meet, I'd be happy.
I would be happy to meet with you.
But I mean, would you agree that we shouldn't allow the homeless to shoot heroin at a homeless shelter?
Yelling, buddy. We don't allow. And
we do allow.
Nothing like that should be allowed, and there should
It
be
is allowed.
transparency and
Brenda is
accountability.
allowing that to happen.
Say it again?
Brenda is allowing that to happen.
That's on record. It is happening.
So that's what I will follow up myself personally.
You and I agree that we shouldn't allow the homeless to be shooting heroin at the taxpayer's expense, right?
Well, we shouldn't allow an encampment.
We shouldn't allow.
We shouldn't allow an encampment that's fenced in, that's inhumane, and you have inexperienced people allowing people to shoot up.
It's a loud room.
Throughout the meeting,
We're
going to answer your questions.
They're not answering.
And they
It's like they're yelling at Glenn Grothman when he's walking by in 2011. They will answer all your questions.
No, they're not answering the questions.
It's totally on the table, buddy.
I asked,
it is 100% on the table.
Is one alderman
something like that being cut from the next coming budget? Alders need to get up to speed on all that, and I think just
No, we've been telling you all that for quite some time.
I mean, Joe Tarr is such a fabulous reporter.
And that is happening in Washington. City of Washington.
Hey, I'm not preventing anything.
Left and right. Put them in industrial park.
It's a real policy.
Oh, absolutely. But they've been
Why are they all?
Yeah, she's quite right.
Never known an alder cared very much. Maybe in
Let me just say, I backed God and I was first raise money fundraiser. Here's the problem. I know you're working for it, but
I work for Progressive. And I haven't even started. I started in about a week. So
I understand. The fact of it.
and yeah, we love the mayor.
realize it. So, and you're seeing the backlash now. So, you know, and thank God. And it was, quite frankly, three aldermen out there that's that are going to intimidate a lot. And
They're the ones who put it together.
they didn't start out that way. That's after we put the pressure on. Anyway,
I'll win here.
I've got a